Hello and welcome to today's lesson on interpreting the remainder. When we think about interpreting remainders, there are three possible things that we could do with it at the end of our work. The first possible action we could take is to ignore it. In some word problems that you're going to solve today, you will not need to have the remainder as part of your final answer, and you will understand that in just a minute. So sometimes we can just ignore it when we're answering these problems. The second thing that we could possibly do with a remainder is to report it as a fraction or a decimal. In some of the word problems you'll be working with today, you'll understand why it's important to not just throw away or ignore the remainder, but to actually use it as part of your answer. The final possibility for interpreting a remainder is to round the answer up. There are some cases where you will get a remainder, but you'll need to round your answer up because the information that the problem is asking for requires that the remainder not be thrown away or reported as a fraction or a decimal. You will again understand this better towards the end of this video. So our first possibility for interpreting a remainder is to ignore it. Let's look at this problem to see how this works. It costs $3 to rent a video. Bonita has $14. How many videos can she rent? So basically what we need to do to solve this problem is divide the $14 by the $3 it costs to rent one video. We're going to use our partial quotients method this time. And I know that 3 goes into 14 4 times. 4 times 3 is 12. 12 minus 14 is 2. And since 2 is smaller than 3, I know that I'm finished with my dividing. Since I only had one answer over on my right side this time, I don't need to do any adding or anything, so I'm just going to write 4 up top. Now this is where we're going to think about what this remainder means, because she can't just rent a part of a video, she only has the $2 left. So in this case, we are going to ignore our remainder, and our answer is going to be that she can rent 4 videos. No remainder. The second way we can interpret a remainder is to report it as a fraction or a decimal. Let's look at the problem below to see how this works. There are 100 minutes of computer time for 8 students to share equally. How many minutes should each student get? Using our partial quotients method, our problem is going to look like this. 100 divided by 8. First thing I'm going to do is figure out how many times I think that 8 can go into 100. And I know my 8 facts pretty well, so I know that 8 goes into 100 at least 10 times. So 10 times 8 is 80. When I subtract that out, I'm going to be left with 20. I know that 8 goes into 16 2 times, and since 16 is close to 20, I know that it can't go into 20 any more than that. 2 times 8 is 16. When I subtract that, I'm left with 4. Then I'm going to come back over to my right side and add my 10 plus my 2, which gives me 12. So my answer right now is 12 remainder 4. So now we have to decide what we're going to do with our remainder. We have a total of 4 minutes left over after we finished our dividing. One thing I can do is I can take those 4 minutes and turn them into seconds and divide those seconds up between the students to figure out exactly how long they're going to get. If I do this, I need to first change my 4 minutes into the number of seconds that it represents. And in this case, 4 minutes represents 240 minutes because there are 60 seconds in a minute and there are 4 minutes altogether. So we've got 240 divided by 8. Use our partial quotients. I know that there are 3 8s in 24, so there are 30 8s in 240. 30 times 8 is exactly 240, so I'm left with 0. No adding or anything left to do. So what this means is I'm going to end up with 12 minutes and 30 seconds of computer time per student. This is not the only possible answer though, so let's look at another one. Another way is to change the 4 minutes, is to divide the remainder among the 8 students. So the remainder is then reported as a fraction of 4/8, or if we reduce it, it's also equal. I'm going to move this over because that's not a good spot for that. So we either have 4/8, but if we reduce it and turn it into a reduced form of that fraction, we have 1/2. So they could have 12 minutes I'm sorry, not 12 minutes. 12 and 1/2 minutes, which is the same thing as the 12 minutes and 30 seconds that we talked about a minute ago. It just has a fraction instead of a number, or instead of like a whole number after it. We could also report 1/2 as 0.5, so we could also say that they get 12.5 minutes on the computer as well. And all three of these answers really mean the same thing. All three of these would be accepted as correct. It really just depends on your comfort level as far as changing minutes to seconds or kind of dividing out that remainder so that it's split up evenly between all of these students. The third and final way to interpret a remainder is to round the answer up. So let's look at the following problem to see how this might work. A roller coaster holds 30 people. There are 252 people waiting for a ride. How many times will the roller coaster need to run so all 252 people get a ride? As always, the first thing I need to do is use my partial quotients method to go ahead and divide this number out. So I've got 252, and I'm going to divide that by 30 because it holds 30 people at a time. I know that 30 goes into 252 approximately 5 times. So I'm going to start there. 5 times 30 is 150. So I'm going to subtract, and I end up with the number 102. Knowing that, I'm going to think about now how many times 3 goes into 10, and I know that it'll go in approximately 3 times. It won't be exact, and I'll have a remainder, but that's okay. So 30 goes into 102 3 times. 3 times 30 is 90, so when I subtract that out, I'm going to be left with 12. 12 is a smaller number than 30, so I know I'm done dividing, but I'm going to circle my remainder so that I remember that I have to use it in some way. And I'm going to come over to the right side and add up my two numbers, so 5 plus 3 is equal to 8, so my answer for right now is 8 remainder 12. But I can't have a roller coaster run 8 remainder 12 times. I have to figure out what to do with that so that everybody gets to have a ride on this roller coaster. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually round this answer up. So the roller coaster isn't just going to run 8 times. It has 12 more people that it has to service before it can be finished running. So I have to take this 8 remainder 12 and I have to round it up to 9. So my answer will be 9 times. That's how many times the roller coaster will need to run to make sure that everybody, all 252 people, get a ride. Here is your practice problem for the day. CDs are on sale for $9 including tax. How many can you buy with $30? Don't forget to tell what the remainder represents if there is one, and decide what you're going to do about the remainder and write it on your paper. Remember that your final answer may or may not include the remainder, and if it does not, make sure that you show your work with the remainder, but that you explain why you did or did not decide to use the remainder in your final answer. Good luck!